Where's the love? Where's the love? It's right here in the heart of the city. I'm Silas Grant, and I got my co-pilot with me.
What's up, Joe?
Tony Lewis, what's up?
I'm good, man. What's happening?
Good, man.
You all right?
I can't complain.
Yeah, what's been happening with you, man? You know what we been doing, man? Yeah, what's that? What you ain't been the last couple shows, right? You done some. What's the latest fitness feat that they have? What we doing, man?
So not a fitness feat, but I do want to shout out Jonathan Tate for Food on the Stove.
Yeah,
he had a Prepared Together Wellness Summit this past weekend, and I was one of the guest facilitators. And what he's done is he's dedicated the nonprofit to primarily firefighters, but just first responders in general. And the whole idea is to get them to understand the total investment in themselves, right? They give of themselves 24/7. And so they were out at Inova in Fairfax on Friday, and then they had a gala on Saturday, which I couldn't make, but I was glad to be able to contribute and talk to a lot of MPD cadets and fire cadets about the decision they make to become first responders and how they got to respond to themselves too.
Yeah, which ultimately gonna make them better.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
So shout out to them and shout out to Tate. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, I know you remember this, but you know, he was a guest back in the first. Way back, man.
Yeah,
you know what I'm
even
saying?
before Food in the Stove. Yeah. So we got to
bro.
get him back on here too.
Nah, for sure, man. That's
and then
dope.
you got the manifest on. That remind me of the Rammies. We were with KJ.
Yeah. Me and old Hughes was together.
Yeah.
The Rammies. Shout out Sean Townsend, and all his staff at the Restaurant Association, from Metropolitan Washington, man. One of the best nights of the year in this city, man. Yeah. And I appreciate Sean's leadership there and being able to be a bridge to folks that may not have necessarily been familiar with the Rammies prior to his leadership there.
Yep.
And I think it's major. I went last year. Jessica and I had an incredible time. And this year topped last year. And that's a lot to say because last year was amazing. So many incredible, DC has really become an incredible food destination. I think it's very representative of how cosmopolitan our city has become through the food options that exist, you know? Yeah. And to see, and also I just want to say to that industry, thank you for being a second chance employer. And so for someone like me, that's also important that you know, that I was present, because the restaurant industry, the hospitality industry has been very open to hiring the formerly incarcerated, which everybody know how important that is to me. So yeah, all in all, it was an incredible night. Also, you know, got a chance to hang out with Angel, Aaron and Tiffany, you know, a lot of members of the council, the mayor was there, people like Mark Bonds, Ron Moten, you know, just a whole gamut of folks, man, that was there. And we got a chance to, you know, the beauty, why I'm bringing those folks up was, you know, a lot of times, man, we run into each other and wherever it is, but typically it's like talking shop, right? And I enjoyed the opportunity to just, man, talk to people about just the night and what they were drinking, how did they like this option, you know, just regular people stuff. I think that is what will lead to people collaborating and having better outcomes when it's not just about your title and my title, but like, no, I you know, we got this in common, you know? Yeah. So yeah, it was a beautiful night, bro.
That's good. Yeah, I had a good time. My second year also going to it. And just, yeah, like you said, good people.
We had a good time,
good time,
bro.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things too, just that happened at the Rammies that I think I want to talk about just briefly though. I know you had individual conversations, and I had individual conversations about how much people have been enjoying the interviews, man.
Yeah.
And then we had some collectively, you know, where people cornered both of us and just shared that with us, man. That really meant a lot to me. You know what I'm saying? That meant a lot too, bro. So yeah, man. Rammies was dope. I'll be there next year. I gotta put it on the calendar. I don't want it to sneak up on me.
Yeah.
And I want to try to get more people that we know and love to attend.
Yeah. No, I agree. Same sentiment here. So speaking of the podcast, right, one of the things that people have said to me, I know for sure, and I think they've said it to you as well, is people have had a couple of, I guess, misconceptions that I want to clear up real quick. One, like, this is not just about always having like DC people on here. Like, we're not limiting it to that. And then secondly, I've had some people say to me, do y'all even have women guests on y'all show?
Bro,
right?
the mayor of the District of Columbia said that to me. I said, what you doing Wednesday? Right. What your Wednesdays look like, Madam Mayor? But I thought, I was like, damn. But it was, I'm like, no, we've had Angel on, we've had Faith on. But it's not like we're not, you know, it just sometimes the guests just coming as they come though, right? It's not just so much like we definitely, you know, but I also knew, you know, coming up we had a queen gonna be joining us, right? You know, so yeah. But I appreciated that. One of the things that when Zachary Parker was here, our last guest, he said feedback is love.
That's it. He did say that.
So I receive it.
Yep.
Yeah. Keep that coming.
And so we heard him loud and clear. And we do have someone with us today, a very special guest, family. And we're here to talk tonight about some issues that are really specific to women in terms of how it impacts them, but also I think it's an opportunity for us as men to listen to. So we have Christina Jones here with us.
Hi.
Good evening.
Hi. I'm so excited to be here. Like, this is like being at home, being in the salon, in the living room.
That's right.
So thank you all so much. I'm so excited to talk about, you know, Black women and sexual assault. And how it affects us as Black women and how it affects Black men. We don't have this conversation enough. We don't have this conversation in mixed company because normally it's just the men talking or just the women talking. So that's why I'm so excited to be here with you all today.
No, thank you. For real. Thank you for being here. And thank you for your work, first of all. Not just in this regard, right? But, you know, your history and as a attorney, working in the region, right? In PG County here in the city, and so can you talk a bit about that? Let's talk some about your past duties and responsibilities, if you will.
So I'm an attorney by trade. I'm actually from Prince George's County, live in Ward 7, have lived in Ward 7 for the past 7 years now. Right. So went to Hampton. Let me start out with Hampton. Hampton, my freshman year, ended up at University of Maryland. Went to Howard for law school. Didn't want to leave the city. Worked as a judicial law clerk in Prince George's County, and then worked at the state's attorney's office in Prince George's County for about 5 years. And in that role, I worked in several different places. So not only in misdemeanor court, but also juvenile court, which I loved being a part of, a positive part of the juvenile system. One thing that I tell people all the time is not every kid will graduate from juvenile court, but almost every adult has had some type of interaction. Every adult in criminal court has had some type of interaction with the juvenile justice system, whether it's an arrest, whether it's a charge or a conviction. So we have to do better as a legal system in making sure that kids don't graduate and making sure that we're actually rehabilitating children and not just putting them in a revolving door to the criminal justice system.
And that's locally and nationally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's powerful. And for me as a Black prosecutor, it was also important because I used to tell my colleagues, you need to be nice to everybody because they could be my cousin. Like, I am from Prince George's County, Maryland. So you know, have to make sure that you treat everybody with dignity and respect. And especially for my, you know, colleagues of other hues. It's like we as Black people are not people to be put in cages. We are people. We are more than just numbers to cases. So I also handled adult felonies and homicides. Then I came over to Washington, D.C., where I worked under the Karl Racine, who I like to call Uncle Karl. He's absolutely amazing in his philosophy on how D.C. treats children who come into the system. Really made me want to be a part of his administration. But the reason why I became a prosecutor is because I was actually sexually abused as a child. And what people don't know is most sexual assault cases go unreported for many different reasons. Let me give you a couple stats. So for every one rape that is reported to law enforcement, rape of a black woman specifically, 15 rapes are not reported. 1 in 4 black girls will be sexually assaulted before the age of 18. And 35% of black women overall have had some type of unwanted sexual contact in their lifetime. The numbers are insane. And I think for anybody, if you know, a group of 5 women, one of those women has been sexually assaulted. And I think a part of it is people don't understand what sexual assault is. And it's basically unwanted, unconsented to sexual contact. So anywhere from butt grabs, breast grabs, penetration, penis to vagina, penis to mouth, anything that's unwanted sexual contact. And for black people specifically, there are so many root causes and barriers to us reporting. My mentor in my head, Dr. Beth Ritchie, she's a black professor who does a lot of really great research around black women and domestic violence and sexual assault. She calls it the loyalty trap. And what the loyalty trap is, as black women, we feel such loyalty to black men, and we don't want to put them in the system because we know what the system does to black men, that oftentimes we won't report when we're being harmed to the detriment of ourselves. It's also thinking about systemically the rape of black women. And you have to go you don't have to go that far back, but all the way back to the days of slavery, when this country was built off of the rape of black women.
Correct.
The ways that white enslavers would multiply their property is by raping black women, because then you have more property. Capitalism, this country was built off of our bodies. Yeah. So of course, that's something, unfortunately, that's a part of our DNA, that's a part of our history that unfortunately is continuing to be perpetrated. And when you think about some of the tropes that we grow up with, so what goes on in this house
stays in this house.
A lot of times those things were said off of protection. So taking it back to the 1700s, if a black woman was being raped by her enslaver, her oftentimes, the people that looked out for her, her mother, her grandmother would say, don't say anything about it because you're only going to get in trouble if you tell somebody that this man is coming in and raping you. So they would say it as a source of protection. But now it's harming us because now we're saying it in 2024 and allowing sexual abuse to occur and proliferate in our homes, in our communities, because we don't want to tell people this is going on in our house. We don't want to get our men in trouble. We don't want to, believe the women who are survivors. And before we move forward, I want to just say this too. 1 in 6 men are survivors of sexual abuse. And when we're thinking about the perspective and how we talk about sexual abuse, I know you all have known some men who have had sexual experiences at 11, 12, 13, with older women, and men carry it as, I was 12 when I first had sex and she was 20. Yeah. That's rape.
Yeah.
Because on the other side, if it was an 11-year-old girl and a 20-year-old man, as a society, we automatically
everybody would see it that way.
Yeah.
Everybody would see it like that. But on the flip side, we don't. And I think a lot of men are getting more comfortable with talking about their experiences of being sexually assaulted, but a lot of that comes with the language of what does sexual assault mean.
Yeah, I'm sitting here just thinking about, when you're talking about even back in slavery, even outside of the enslavers raping, women on the plantations or what have you. Even once they started to create sort of these slave farms, these breeding farms, that wasn't consensual. It was, the women didn't have a choice.
Right.
They had to go in there, so it's like that's a long history of not just the act of women being raped, but everything that came along with that. You know what I'm saying?
And men will be raped too by their enslavers.
Absolutely.
As a source of power and control, because rape is not really about the act, the orgasm. It's about the power and control, the power that I have over you. So enslavers would use rape as a tool to control black men as well.
Yeah.
What I thought about, which I thought it was good you broke it down in terms of describing the acts that fit into that description of sexual abuse. Those of us growing up in the 90s, you go to events, parties, go-go's, skating rinks. That was almost like the entry to even get a girl's attention. Guys would grab girls in that way, right? Mm-hmm. So even when you're talking about grabbing body parts, right, that was almost an entry level to have a conversation.
It was an expectation as a woman to go into the club knowing that you would be grabbed. And so I think that is so true, and culturally that teaches us it's okay. One of the things that, as a prosecutor specifically in D.C., I remember there was a case, we got a lot of cases of like grabbing in school, and they were 12, 13, 14-year-olds. And historically it would be, no, you take the case, you prosecute it, you put the boy on probation, that's what happens to it. And I remember I was just like, okay, we cannot prosecute our way out of something that culture says is what you're supposed to do. Right. How can we as an office look at this differently? And I went to the deputy at the time and I said, hey, I know sexual assault cases are normally not in restorative justice. Like, that's not a place that we have decided as an office we want to have those cases live. But I said, look, this is the problem that I'm seeing. I think I see something there with these grabbing cases that we can put them in restorative justice. And I will never forget, we had one case where it was a young man who had a butt grab of a young woman. And in the particular circle in restorative justice, you bring your community, the person who the harm has been done to brings their community, and there's a facilitator. And this particular circle, the young man's mother started crying because she had been sexually abused at the same age as that little girl whose butt he grabbed. Yeah. And to me, what makes more of an impact to a young man? Going in court, seeing a judge and getting that badge of honor, like, oh, I'm like now have a criminal record, and putting them on probation for no reason, or hearing about your mother's experience off of something that you did and knowing that I can't do this again because this is how it impacts my community.
Yeah, and I remember being a youngin', and my mother, she deals with schizophrenia. But I remember, like, before she really got way, like, real bad, one day we were driving, and she just, like, started crying. I'm like, I'm the only child. I'm like, Mom, what's wrong? What's wrong? And she was saying, I don't know what triggered or what made her have the thoughts, but she was saying, she didn't give me the details per se, but she just was saying how she had spent the night over one of her friend's house or something, and, something bad happened to her. You know what I mean? And that always stuck with me, like, in my mind, like, I probably at that time I'm probably like 10 maybe. Mm-hmm. But I just, to your point of when you brought that about the young, it's like when you hear or you see harm brought to the woman who gave birth to you, who raised, you know what I'm saying, you kind of, it puts you in a different frame of mind. Like, I don't ever want to duplicate that behavior. You know what I'm saying? And and me seeing my parents fight when I was, younger too, that stuck with me. You know what I mean? In that way. Like, no, I ain't never doing that. You feel what I'm saying?
Yep.
How do you, we talk about these stats with children or women, but when you get more specific and talk about whether it's a black child or a black woman as the victim, and the society sort of like doubt, right? Or not giving those individuals the benefit of the doubt. Like, they have to prove that they have been a victim. You spoke about that happening, with you, right? Mm-hmm. Can you just break that down a little bit, and what's being done to combat that?
That's a loaded question about the second part, what's being done to combat it. I feel like we as a society do not believe survivors. We don't. We, like, even thinking about, like, the Cassie situation, we as a society didn't believe her, and so we saw it on a video. Yeah. It took seeing it with your own eyes to be like, oh, okay, yes, she was abused. It's a culture of not believing women, and we have to think about who does that benefit for us to say this isn't happening, for us to say it doesn't happen here, for us to say, you know, this doesn't happen with this type of man. He has too much money, or he doesn't have any influence, so why would he be doing this? Or he's too old, or he's too young. It's really important to think about why we don't believe survivors, and we really don't believe black and brown survivors.
Yeah. Full
stop, period. And it has to do with, as a society, how we view black women. And there are some researchers who call it the strong black woman archetype.
I've heard that, yeah.
Where it's like, you know, we are seen as black women as resilient and strong and mouthy, and we don't take nothing. So how could you, this strong black woman, be raped? Because you know, you're so mouthy and you're so talkative. Like, if he would have been in the room with you, you would have been able to fight him off. So you must have wanted it. So why would I believe that? Black women have also, throughout history, been tagged with this Jezebel posture of this archetype about, you know, we are just sexual beings and we ooze sex and we always want to have sex. So therefore we can't be raped because you want it. You're a black woman. Those myths have been with us for hundreds of years.
For sure.
So when we talk about how do we combat those myths, one is recognizing it. Two, it's how do we talk to our young people, our kids? How many times, and have you ever seen a 5-year-old, I'm going to say 5, but a 5-year-old put her hand on her hip and like poke her lips out, and an adult says, oh, you so fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, you being you know what though, but and that's culture. That's so. Yeah, we that's sexualizing that kid. You know what I'm saying? Like that ain't. Yeah, I hear people say that. I've never subscribed to that, but even having 2 daughters, like nah, like that's not that. Like she can do that without you seeing it.
Saying she's fast. Like you're saying she's sexual. You're saying a 5-year-old.
She don't even know what that is.
Putting her hand on her hip.
And if somebody sees it that way, she ain't the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
But what is she hearing?
Yeah.
What is even also, like, think about kindergartners. A young girl comes home and says, you know, so and so boy hit me, and somebody says, oh, he must like you. That's why he hit you.
Yeah.
What is she growing up learning? If he likes me, he's going to hit me. When we think about intimate partner violence and the proliferation of intimate partner violence in the black community, it goes back to what we are telling our children.
And you know, so yes, and what and that gets compounded. You get told that young, you see the adults, they fighting, they hitting, but they together. I mean, that
television too.
Reality
shows,
right?
Yeah.
And it's like, and then when you in certain communities, right? You growing up, and you know they tell me you gotta grab her, Joe. She don't want you too soft, you too nice. I've heard people tell when they're growing up, you can't be nice to them. This is what older men told us growing up.
Yep.
Think about that fundament. Like, think about that fundament. You cannot be. What do you mean? What? So what am I supposed to be if not nice?
Right.
And I've had in conversations I've had with women, whether it's women that I've dealt with or women that just I know, that would say about based on what they've seen in their lives in male-female relationships, it's like they'll be with a nice guy and say he's too nice.
Yep.
Too nice.
Yep.
How crazy is that?
Because I'm growing up with men are supposed to be rude, men are supposed to be aggressive, men are supposed to be mean. That's also perpetuating a stereotype.
Yeah, for sure.
Because if you're constantly told that as a man, you're being too nice, you're not being aggressive enough, what is that going to do to you as an 11, 12-year-old?
Yeah. And on the, I want to just get your opinion on this too, or get your, not just your opinion, but like your expertise. I want you to speak to this. You talked about 1 in 6 boys, and 1 in 3 girls?
1 in 4 girls.
1 in 4 girls. And I think it's important for people to understand that most times, right, that's somebody that has proximity to that child.
Absolutely.
Family member, coach, pastor, friend of the family, uncle, aunt, whatever. It's somebody that has proximity. It's not the
man in the white van.
It's not the man in the white van, right?
That's not who's sexually abusing us. Date rape is one of the most common forms of sexual assault. Is somebody who, like you said, has close proximity to you.
It ain't the tree jumper, if you will.
No, it ain't the bunny man, ain't the goat man.
Or the guy in the trail jumping out the bushes when you jog. I mean, that happens, but...
It happens, but it's rare.
It's rare. It's much more rare.
It's much more rare. Yeah. So you have to really think about, for me, so I have a 3-year-old, and I'm always talking to him about body parts, because one of the issues that we see in the prosecution world is parents aren't teaching kids body parts, and that's a way that sexual assault spreads. So let me give you an example. I had a case where the teacher, the little girl was telling the teacher, my daddy ate my cookie. And the teacher is thinking she's talking about Oreo. She's not even like, but the little girl kept saying it and kept saying it. So the teacher started asking some questions, came to find out the father was giving the child, was having oral sex with the child, was assaulting the child in that way. And imagine how the sexual abuse would not have spread if you gave the child the correct body parts. Yeah. We don't call our elbows our thingamabob. We say, this is my elbow. Yeah. So it's important to teach your kids their correct body part names, and don't be ashamed of it.
Correct.
Like, kids, there are specific things that physiologically happen to kids that we need to be able to talk about. Like, little boys have erections. Talk about it.
Yeah.
Like, little boys want to touch themselves. Let's talk about it. Instead of putting shame around body parts and shame around what actually is a physiological response for children.
Yeah, all that poom poom, wee wee, and all that. Now you got really.
You got to say this is your vagina. You have to say it.
No, for real, because then they got the language. And can't nobody come in court and be talking about like the kid don't, like that's real. That's real.
Yeah.
And Silas and I, I think I first. And shout out to Diamond Van.
Yeah, for sure.
She was working at that time. She was working at Safe Shores. It's back in like 2010. She a good friend of mine, and she was like, "Hey, I want you to, come past my job." It was in the old Bundy. I was at the so that's right around the corner from my crib and stuff. So anyway, I go in there and I'm like, I kind of felt the same heaviness as I just felt when you just shared that anecdote about the little girl. I felt that heaviness, and it blew my mind. It horrified me. And so what we started to do was try to raise awareness for Safe Shores, and through different events we did to raise, like whether it was school supplies or clothes or whatever. And was able to introduce people like Sonny in the City, Mo Better, the Grants, like people that would, my wife. Well, actually, it was crazy before I met my wife, but when she became my girlfriend, and she started to, volunteer and stuff too, and just spread the amazing work that they were doing. But what jumped out at me the most was, the prevalence of it. And I never forget, not at the beginning, but as time went on, I was dropping off some stuff there, and as I'm leaving out, I see a girl I know, right? And that you ain't just there. You never just there, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, I know she wasn't dropping nothing off. You know what I mean? She was coming to pick up her kid, and she a friend of mine. But I didn't even want to ask, like what? I knew something happened, right? If you hear,
Yep.
And it's like, for organizations like that to have to exist. But the biggest thing was, yes, to support families and victims of sexual assault and torture, but to also, back to the victim piece, right? To treat these children like children, not to interrogate them like they did something wrong. I learned all of those pieces, and it just was like, damn, like the fact that would even have to exist.
Even how they've got like they've got a toy house, and when they get the kids to reenact the story, they can move the dolls through the rooms and display what took place based on their recollection, right? Even that technique in itself is a bridge to be able to get the kid to open up, but more accurately too, right?
I, as a prosecutor, I had an office at Safe Shores because I oversaw all of the child sexual assault cases at one point in D.C. So Michelle Booth Cole is a mentor.
Shout out to Michelle, man. We love you,
Michelle.
Oh my gosh.
What's up? I haven't seen her in a while either.
Yeah, man.
She actually did help me out with the project that I'm doing currently with Black women sexual assault and the role of the church. Yeah. Being a big supporter, being on some of the panels. She's just an amazing person who's been doing this work for so long. And the really cool thing about Safe Shores to me on the prosecution side, you never want a victim to have to tell their story over and over and over again because trauma is not linear. Trauma makes your brain go into circles. Trauma will not tell a story from start to finish. Trauma, as you talk about it, will unlock different things that you completely forgot because the brain is a very powerful tool and the brain is trying to protect you. By not having you relive moments. So as a attorney in the courtroom, you want to make sure that your victim survivor has the best shot at telling their story. And with Safe Shores, they have their forensic psychologists there, and they work with the children, like you said, whether it's the houses, whether it's coloring, to have them tell their story in a way that is child-focused, survivor-centered. I was off in a room where I could see the child telling their story. The forensic psychologist would come in at a certain point and just say, hey, Christina, do you have any more questions that maybe I didn't ask, or do you want me to ask something in a different way? So that I wasn't further traumatizing that child by making them tell their story again. Yeah. That is so completely important. And if you have a child that comes to you and discloses to you, it's really important to just listen. Tell me more is my favorite statement. Tell me more. What do you mean? Like asking them those open-ended questions and making sure you are not, like, there is no judgment, there is no, scorn. I really do say don't be emotional. Because if you start crying, like, they may stop talking. Because they may say, I don't want to see mommy cry, or I don't want to see daddy cry, I don't want to see uncle cry. So it's really about letting them express their stories and then going to the authorities with, this is what they said. One of the really cool things about that the law allows for sexual assault cases is something called an outcry witness. So in most cases, hearsay doesn't come into court. So I can't say, well, Silas told me XYZ when he got robbed. Not saying you're going to get hope. You're not going to get robbed. But I can't say that. But in sexual assault cases, if I'm the first person you tell, I can be your outcry witness where I can talk about these are the different things that he told me to help bolster the case. So just by them coming to you, you may be an important piece for them to get justice in court if that's the path that you all decide to choose. So it's really just, whether it's a child or it's an adult, being open, being non-judgmental, and not being overly emotional. You can show emotion, but don't start bawling. Don't start saying, oh my gosh, why didn't I know? None of that.
You ain't going to court, though.
Listen.
Sorry, no, I'm sorry. So, I'm sorry. You hear what I said, did you?
I remember that. Like subpoena, Tony Lewis.
Go ahead,
So we talked a little bit about shame. Mm-hmm. We talked a bit about the hyper proximity, typically with the culprit. And you touched on church a little bit. And in our communities, historically, that has been a central place, right, for most of the community. Even if you don't go, when you in trouble, we got to go to the church, right? Get a meeting with the pastor or go to the regular service. And you've put a focus, like you kind of teased out a bit, on engaging churches about this conversation. And I want you to talk about the dynamics of that because, one, we go to the church when we need help. Two, this stuff also happens in church. And three, the idea of belief or disbelief oftentimes is cut and dry. Either they believe you or they don't in the church environment. So talk about how you specifically engage churches about this topic.
So 78% of Black people consider themselves churched. So in America, the majority consider themselves Christians, and then Catholics, and then they consider themselves being practicers of Islam. But we are the most churched, most faith community in America. Like you said, we go to church when something goes wrong. We go to church Christmas, Mother's Day, Easter, all those good holidays. And because church is such a central focus in our community, when we talk about systemic reform, we're often talking about legal systems. But the church is a system for us. So how do churches fit into that systemic reform as we think about violence against women, violence against vulnerable people? I grew up in church ever since I was like a fetus, right? And in church, you get a lot of messages, especially as a woman, about you have to stay pure. You have to, make sure you're not tempting men. You can't wear this outfit or wear your clothes can't be skimpy. Sometimes even telling young girls, and I've seen this happen, hey, stay away from that deacon. When the deacon is committing sexual assault and you're not holding the deacon accountable, instead, you're telling the victims, like, hey, don't go over there. You're policing them in a way that's not healthy and not actually, going to the root cause of the problem. A lot of times in churches, we have men who are in power who abuse that power. Because I have the power to tell you what to do. Because if you don't engage in sex with me, like there's something wrong with you. Or if you don't engage with sex, I'm the man of God. Like you should be doing whatever I say. And a lot of churches, we brainwash women into thinking like the pastor is above all, the ministers are above all. And, I don't say this to vilify the church. I'm a pastor's wife. My husband, shout out to Jason Jones.
That's my man. That's right. Yeah.
He is a pastor and has been a pastor for almost as long as we've been married. And it's important to remember, excuse me, it's important to remember that pastors are just men. And not all pastors have your best intentions at heart. And a lot of women have grown up with that. So for me, it's about having women's stories be centered in church. Their stories of sexual assault, their stories of sexual abuse, so that they can also get healing. Looking at the stats, we know that there are survivors in the pews. So how are we helping them? What do we do when they come? Survivors and abusers. And oh my gosh, and abusers. Yeah. Sorry, I did a conversation recently where there was a young woman who said she was going to this church and she had been raped a long time ago, and she went to the church and her rapist was in church. Praising God. And she was like, yeah, it happened a long time ago, so maybe he got his life together. But she was like, when I saw that, I was like, what do I do?
Man, that's deep as it get. Mm-hmm. But the question that I would have, you said she said it happened it happened some time ago, right? I mean, one would hope that individual, was there in church
for the right reason.
Yeah, for the right reason, right? But who's to know that? And so, like, so does she go to the head of the church and say, hey, we got to have a conversation?
That.
Or like, how?
No. And it's not her fault that she didn't, but no. And churches do not have a policy, do not have a procedure, don't have something laid out where if I am abused, what do I do? If I know a child is being abused, who do I go to? So really what we're doing with these conversations is building a set of recommendations for churches across the country to really engage with how are you treating survivors? What do you do if there's an allegation of sexual assault? Also, we talk about the Catholic Church a lot, but the Catholic Church isn't the only church that's causing sexual assault.
Could we go there for a second? Yes. Though? As a somebody raised Catholic. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm gonna still say I'm a practicing Catholic, but I really have been, and I didn't really grow up like going to church a lot, but I went to Catholic school. Mm-hmm. And then my grandmother used to go to church, but I ain't really used to go with her a lot. But still, I lived in a house where my grandmother went to church. Right. My aunt went to church. And as they got older, and I got older, they went to church even more, right? So I pull up with them sometime, right? But me having my own family, we don't go to church like that. We would go to church for something, you know, when my grandma was alive or when my uncle was alive, you know, here and there. But me and my priest, cool. It's my man, we cool. He calls me for stuff, you know, blah, blah, blah. But I think a lot of it, though, subconsciously, with all that's come out in the last 10 years about the Catholic Church, it's literally hard for me. But I also am one to sort of like piggybacking on what you said, that the church or my belief in God is not my belief in men.
Yep.
Or those that, you know, work at the church or in the faith or whatever the case may be, right? I understand that. So it hasn't at all impacted my faith. But what I am saying is this worldwide abuse that the Catholic Church has embarked upon, like it's almost I don't even know. It's almost like, you know,
it's like we've now been so skewed. All right, so personal story. When Valerie and I first met, we met at church, right? Our families are like founding members of the church that we attend, right? Yeah. And when I was first pointed out to her, she was literally in the hallway walking with somebody, and they had been talking about me. She didn't know who they were talking about, and I happened to.
Y'all had an arranged marriage? Is that what happened?
That's a fact. I can explain that in a minute, but yeah, that's a fact, almost, right?
Yeah.
So I used to work in the children's ministry for a long time, 2 to 4 year olds, right? And when she first saw me, they were like, "That's him right there. He's in that room," and I'm working with the kids, right? We do a mock service, right, at the time, and initially she was like, "I don't think I'm gonna like him. He worked with kids. I don't." It was a part of that. Right. Why would he want to be in there with kids?
Yeah.
Right? So then to go a step further, we do have a process, like a background check process, right? And they do it periodically. So after we got into a strong relationship, she became like a reference for me. They called her and they went through a series of questions. Imagine just, you know, it's a big church, but it's a small church. So the woman calling goes to her questions. And she's like, "Would you leave your children with him?" And she was like, "Well, we engaged. I will hope." Right. My point is 2 things. One, the stigma that people have, again, around men who have a genuine passion for working with young people. And then secondly, like, you still have to ask those questions.
Yeah, bro.
Right.
And you have, and you know, my biggest thing with Catholicism at this point was not only the abuse of children worldwide. I mean, just because you get these archdioceses all over the globe, bro, right? Not just in America, but literally worldwide of the same thing. But how the church hit it, so that's what we get. You know, so like when and I think that's not just though the Catholic Church, but like church,
it's not just the Catholic
right,
Church.
where people hide it. Right, and then a lot of times it's depending on where you are, many of the victims are, well, clearly they're vulnerable on some level anyway, right? Just being a kid is a vulnerability in that situation, but meaning also like when, you know, a lot of times it's people in poor communities and, you know, this, that, and the third. And so people that don't necessarily have a voice or can't elevate their voices for, you know, the powers that be to hear, and people benefit from that. But it's like, so for you to be having these conversations about churches and in churches and with church, I think is super powerful and super necessary. You know what I mean? Because you know, people go to church. It's supposed to be the safest place, bro. Just think about that, right? Like for those that have been abused in the church, I mean, that's sort of like and you know, in my work in reentry and dealing with, you know, marginalized populations, like, you know, people that battled addiction or, you know, people that have been incarcerated, and they get sick and they tell you about, you know, things that have happened to them as children, as young adults. And those things are so much about where they are right now, bro. You know what I'm saying? And nobody gives them that, again, back to, they can't be seen as a victim. You know, when they break whatever law, nobody is saying, "Damn, what happened to you?" Nobody's asking them questions. But to couple that with, if that happens, that thing that we're talking about happened to you in church, that could put somebody's belief in God at risk.
Have you experienced, or does it feel like you may have experienced any pushback from church leaders, like people trying to be oblivious, like, no, it's not happening here, or it couldn't happen here, or we got it all under control, or why? Why are you shaking the tree, right?
It's definitely been questions about when churches say yes. Sometimes the congregations have asked, "Oh my gosh, is something wrong?"
Right.
And I think oftentimes we have these conversations when somebody's been abused. But how much more powerful is it to get out in front of the conversation before something bad happens, to make sure that we have everything in place so that if something does happen, we have the procedures in place. And a lot of times it's more putting abusers on notice. Because if they know this church is talking about sexual abuse, they may not go to that church to sexually abuse people, because this church is already on notice. The church is already having the conversation. It's a part, for me, prevention. And helping survivors be safe.
You know, one of the things that for the two conversations, the prior conversation about when you were talking about the outcry witness and things of that nature, right? Or how to engage with, whether it's a child or an adult, like when you're talking to them about what may have happened to them. As a parent, right? As a dad, one of the things I think about is, first of all, that's like one of my worst fears, right? But will my child, I would never want them to be like, damn, I ain't gonna tell daddy, because I know if I tell daddy, you know, I might lose daddy, or daddy might do, you know what I'm saying? Like I really think about that. Like what's the best way for parents to keep those open lines of communication? I know you did mention the language piece. Should parents sort of periodically have those conversations? Or, you know, I tell my daughters, y'all can't stay over nobody's house, bro. Like, I don't be with that. And I gotta catch myself, because I be like, because something happened to you, I'm killing the whole household. And I say that over, I only keep, I gotta get better.
That is a fair dad response.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, but I'm trying, but I need better language, and I recognize that. But like, what would you say to parents out there though? What's the best way to talk to your kids?
I literally have these conversations with my 3-year-old in the car on the way from camp all the time. So, like, I'll just learn them to say, you know, what did you do at camp today? Or, like, who did you play with? What did you eat for lunch? And, you know, my son is a smart aleck at 3, and he'll be like, Mama, you packed my lunch, so you know what I ate. I'm like, sorry. I'm not get popped in the backseat. But I'll also ask him, like, did somebody touch your penis today? And I'll ask it in the same kind of question. So he's just like, no, Mommy, nobody touched my penis today. But it normalizes that discussion.
Gotcha.
And it may seem, it's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel awkward when you first start asking those questions. But the more routine you ask those questions, and the more they're used to responding to you, if something does happen, they'll be able to say, whoa, my mommy said that's not supposed to happen. Or they'll come and tell me, because they're like, Mommy, somebody touched my penis today. It's having those conversations and normalizing those conversations. And also having really honest, frank conversations with your kids about sex. Now I will say, and I said this in a conversation I had a couple months ago, that is not the end all be all, because I grew up in a household. My mother's a nurse. We had very detailed sex conversations when I was a kid, because she wanted us to know body parts and wanted us to know what was sex, where babies came from, all that good stuff. I grew up in a 2-parent household with 2 cars in the suburbs, and we had a house when I was a baby. And I was still sexually assaulted. So none of that stuff matters. Like we said before, it doesn't matter, like, you know, how much influence you have or money you have or how poor you are, but having those conversations are important, because then you start to normalize the conversation. So if something does happen, your child's going to come to you.
So when it comes to conversations specifically in church, right? Typically, you're not able to deal from the entire deck. And what I mean by that is, if the church is preaching abstinence for kids, then I would assume it's difficult for you to come in and talk to girls and boys about consent with each other versus what's rape with each other.
Yeah.
Because the church is saying they shouldn't be having sex at all.
And my response is always, but they are.
Yeah. How about that?
You know that, and to me, it's more important to dispel the shame around sex. I think the church in general teaches sex terribly because it's always don't do it. Jesus is watching. You're going to go to hell. Like, it's all these crazy things for something that your body naturally wants. Full stop. So it's not about only preaching abstinence or only talking about abstinence, but also like when we know, because we know we've all been teenagers. So like understanding that if something goes wrong, let's talk about what happens then. Also, and I've seen this happen in churches where, two people are having sex and the young girl, consensual, but like the young girl is 16 and she gets pregnant and she's forced to stand in front of the church and apologize for getting pregnant. But the young boy who got her pregnant is still sitting on the drums, playing drums, happy as a clam, not paying attention. Like, you're making the girl come and apologize when there are two people who are having sex. Wow. And the boy is just like, yeah, he's supposed to do that. It's about the language and the shame that we put on women specifically in church around sex. It's about purity culture saying that if, a boy wants to have sex with you, it's because of something that you're doing. And you shouldn't be in that room with him, or you shouldn't be alone with him because he's going to want to have sex with you. It's teaching that men have no agency and that y'all are all these feral, like, animals who just care about sex. So women have to be even more, like, diligent about, I have to dress in, head to toe modesty, when we're not telling the truth about, like, men are not these terrible, feral human beings. Like, but that's what we teach young boys in church.
I want to, because that was that's my next statement / question, right? I see the discussion specifically online about sexual assault, and I see women often talk about men talk to your friends, or, if that's your homie, but I can speak for some men, not all, but the guys who act like that when they do, we're oblivious to it. They don't, that's not a culture within our groups that is accepted.
Yeah.
So if he's doing that to girls, we don't know that.
Yeah.
So when we get that feedback from, like you said earlier, the council member said feedback is love, right? When we get that feedback to check our homies, we're starting from ground zero because we're not aware that it's happening.
Yeah.
He's coming around us and it's like,
hey, you think he coming around saying, guess what I did last night? He not.
Right.
He not.
Right.
And we don't know. And then I've had that happen to me multiple occasions. And then it's even like, I ain't gonna say who. You just need to know who you are.
Get your man, yeah.
So what I'm gonna do with that? What I'm supposed to do with that? I don't even know who
Should
you
I be having
about.
a group chat conversation like, hey, anybody?
Yeah, right. Is that what I'm supposed to send the signal out like, man, who somebody raped somebody last night? You know what I mean? That's an impossibility. But but to that point.
And I've known guys to be excommunicated when people do find out that that's the kind of time they on.
Yeah.
Correct.
Which is important for men to hold other men accountable.
Yeah.
And also to recognize the different ways that women and men can be sexually assaulted. Like when my child gets old enough that we really have that sex conversation, my advice to him is going to be, if she drinks, period, one sip, you're not having sex with her. It's a no. Because if somebody is intoxicated, they are unable to consent. So one person's one drink may inebriate them as much as another person's 3 drinks. And I've seen cases here in the city.
Would you say that again?
One person's one drink may intoxicate them.
No. Before that, no, I get that.
Oh, I'm telling him, do not. If she's drinking, don't have sex with her. Period.
Because by law, she cannot consent.
If she is intoxicated, she cannot consent. And you can't say, oh, she only had one drink, so she's not drunk. Right. You don't know that. You're not in her head. And I've seen cases with young people in this city where young women have been drunk and have been taken advantage of, and we are prosecuting the young men for having sex with them. And they're like, well, she said she wanted to have sex with me, but then as a prosecutor, when I would do my investigation, everybody at the party's like, she was fall down drunk. She was throwing up on herself. Like, they went into the bathroom because she was that drunk. So ignorance is no defense to the law.
Yeah.
And she was that drunk and you still had sex with her. And we could prove it because of the other pieces of evidence that was around that case. But it's like, if they're drinking, do not have sex with them.
And we got to teach young people, not just men, but men and women, about what those conversations should be, about consent. And I mean, everybody, you know, that's not just young people, but I'm just saying, if the younger we started, then they'll grow up with that already, with that toolbox. I think that'll be a great step into, you know, hopefully mitigating some of that stuff.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's not just young people. Sexual assaults happen in nursing homes. Like, if you have dementia or Alzheimer's and cannot consent, there have been instances across this country, in this city, where people have been raped because I can't consent. I don't have the mental capacity to consent. It's like having sex with somebody with Down syndrome or who is high on the autism spectrum and can't actually verbalize their consent. That is third-degree sexual assault, and you can and will be prosecuted if you're found to, you know, have committed that against someone who is vulnerable.
And like, I think about, I mean, in a situation where, like, if somebody, you know, throughout their life, I'm talking about now, like, more on the predator end. If that's what you've done, I mean, you age. You know, it's not, I'm just saying, if you get older and you happen to be in a nursing home,
it's still
you know what I'm saying? So that don't go away either.
Proximity. You have proximity to those people who live with you in that home. And it's up to the facility to be diligent. I remember actually, so my mother's a nursing home administrator, and in law school, I took an elder law class, and I literally, for my end of year paper for the elder law class, wrote a test. I was Christina Brooking back then, but wrote a Brooking 3-part test of when you can have sex with somebody in a nursing home, because it had happened so much in our elder law cases. And I ended up getting the highest grade in the class for that paper, because my professor was like, I've never heard of anybody doing this in that way. So it was just like, yes, there should be a test to make sure somebody has the cognitive ability, the physical ability to consent. Like, having that thought process. We don't think about, you know, protecting our elders in that way. But, you know, we have to. People's caregivers sexually assault them for thinking about our elders.
Because I can imagine, like, so my dad was in a nursing home, and they have case managers. So that sort of, like, tiered questioning, maybe a person who's in, I guess, their right mind or cognitively capable of making decisions may want to seek counsel. Like, am I capable still?
Yep.
I hadn't thought about that. That's interesting.
Because we put a focus on young people, which we should, because we talk about prevention and how can we help young people, and young people are the ones, you know, predominantly who are sexually assaulted. But we got to think about all of our vulnerable populations to make sure that sexual assault and abuse isn't happening.
I mean, which, you know, a tragic thing that happened in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, joint out in California, where they shut it down. It was that much rampant sexual assault to the female inmates going on by staff.
Yep.
They closed it, and really it actually you know, inspired a whole federal oversight bill.
Yep.
I mean, they said it was just crazy. You know what I mean? But again, talking about a vulnerable...
There are cases in courthouses. Like, there was a case in Prince George's County Circuit Court not that long, because I feel like I was a prosecutor then, where a sheriff had raped one of the female inmates, like, in the courthouse. And was like, don't say anything, or I'm going to add time to your... Which, it happens, unfortunately.
A question I wanted to ask you as well, and I guess it's just framing it in terms of, is there a continuum of abuse from a standpoint of, like, have you seen in adult cases that you've been familiar with, how much have you seen that the abuser had been sexually assaulted themselves? Is that a thing?
That happened. That is, like, the primary indicator of whether... And I don't mean to sound crass when I say that, but if you're a child who's been sexually abused, it is likely that you're going to repeat that behavior. So how are we getting help for our kids who are being sexually assaulted and sexually abused? When you look at the cases and look at people's backgrounds, like, one thing that I always saw in juvenile cases and adult cases, one thing that was almost always true is there either domestic violence in your background, or sexual abuse in the background, and that's men or women. So it's how can we help people work through their trauma, help people talk about what has happened to them so they're not either repeating it as they're now being sexual abusers or in other crimes. One thing that I used to do a lot when I would be prosecuting young people, so I had a 13-year-old who had assaulted a 3-year-old, and this was boy on boy. And for me, with these cases specifically, I always looked at it as, what happened to you that you're repeating this behavior? It's not about putting you in jail and throwing away the key because you're 13. You did not learn this behavior on your own. Right. You are just repeating this behavior. So I would have those serious conversations with defense counsel. I would have those serious conversations with the person doing the psychological assessment. You need to figure this out, and like, what is the history? And almost always you saw that this happened to that person, and normally right around that same time. So like, if I'm 3 and I got sexually assaulted, I'm gonna think that is what you do. Yeah. And a lot of times people don't think about sexual abuse for kids when you don't know what sex is. It's a good sensation. You don't realize how warped it is though. So you're thinking as you continue this behavior with other kids that it's a good sensation, that they like this, that they're feeling good because that sexual assault has nestled in your brain. Your brain already isn't developed. You probably aren't having conversations about what sex is anyway. So you're just thinking this is something as simple as, oh, I'm giving my man dap. Because that is how your brain has been wired. If you think about women who have been sexually assaulted, oftentimes, and I'll speak from my own experience, as I was growing up, I used to think that, oh, well, I have sex with guys because that is what, guys want. So you have to learn how to reprogram yourself, pinpoint where that thought is coming from, where that trauma has started, so that you can unlearn those patterns.
Yeah. So you're doing this work under the umbrella of an organization. So talk a bit about the organization, the Battered Women's Justice Project, right?
So Battered Women's Justice Project is my full-time job. I'm the chief executive of external relations, and we work with legal systems for gender-based violence. The work that I do for sexual assault really came out of a conversation that I had with my husband back in January, where I was just like, I have this idea around how can we get churches to talk about sexual assault for April being Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And Jason was like, oh, we should do that at our church. And then he was like, you should call some of our pastor friends to see if they want to do it at their churches. And I'm just like, there's no way people want to talk about this. And literally everybody said yes.
Got you. Okay. Yeah.
Which was, so it's funny because as I'm doing the work and we've reached over 4,200 people over 5 conversations since April, I've had people in my field come up to me and say, how did you do that? Because we're not seeing these numbers and you're doing this on the weekend. But it's all about reaching people where they already are. Like doing a webinar and putting it online and hoping people will see it is one thing. But actually going into churches and saying, okay, let's have this honest and frank conversation so that we can get better as the Big C church is a level of like audacity that most people don't have. But because I'm a pastor's wife, I'm able to speak the language.
Sure.
And I'm able to be like, okay, this isn't an indictment on church. This is a way we get stronger, we get better. And I think churches are waking up and realizing we need to have these conversations because the number one reason why churches get sued is because of sexual abuse.
That's a fact.
That's the number one reason.
And we know, I mean, in terms of pop culture, I mean, you mentioned the Diddy and Cassie situation, but even going back to, Me Too and Cosby. And so sexual assault and women coming forward and examples of women not being believed in the past. Like, that's very, prevalent and present and I think the broader context of society. So it's like, I think people, and anytime, we notice in terms of people providing their, I guess, testimony would be the best word, it frees up other people. When people talk about what they've been through, people be like, yo, if it was dormant or was quiet or with that shit, it helps people say, you know what, that happened to me too.
Right? I remember a Safe Shore story that they shared at one of the events we attended, where a child came forward about the grandfather And that was a watershed moment where like 3 or 4 other women, aunts, siblings, were like, "Yep, me too."
Me too.
Yep, that's what happened in my situation. I was victim number 4. Like, but because we weren't having, and it's not even that we weren't having those conversations as a family. It's the people who were being abused weren't talking to each other because we were told not to by the abuser. That is what happens. And then a lot of times too, as family members, we don't share with our next generation what's happened to us. And I had one of the elder members of my family come to me and tell me not that long ago how they were sexually abused as a child too. And I'm like, that would have helped me if you told me that like 30 years ago. Yeah. Because it shows that there's nothing new under the sun, that this has been happening. But imagine how freeing that would have felt, and how that may have given me the language to say, oh yeah, well, this is happening to me now.
People bury things.
Yep.
People, that trauma. That trauma can be, it's deep, and the older I get and the more I hear, and men, and to the point about men, though, a lot of men still, they're gonna take that to the grave.
Yep.
Because for in this culture of like, machismo and manhood, if that happened to you, like most men not gonna share that, know. But there's a lot of these guys that, have a rage in them, and a lot of sometimes that's where that be stemming from, and then it's not their fault. If you a child, you defenseless, you couldn't do, you know what I mean, and but we got to start having those conversations, with young men, but then also older men, and to potentially be able to seek, we've been in the last 5 years or whatever the case may be, you also seen more conversations around mental health support, therapy, and all that. But that's a great place. You're right. There's that intersection of like, therapy and healing around sexual assault for men. Like nobody's talking about that, but whether people talk about it or not, though, you just said one is happening.
And see, that rage oftentimes comes from a lack of control. Because when you've been sexually abused, it's because you did not have control. Yeah. Like that, again, going back to that power and control, that person wanted to exert that power and control over you. So a lot of times, and this is yes, me generalizing, but for a lot of sexual abuse survivors, it's needing to have that control. And you'll see that showing up in people with rage or perfectionism. Like, I have to be the A student. I have to. One of the things for me as a young person, it was I need to have straight A's because I don't want people to know I'm a statistic. Yeah. I don't want people to see me as this victim.
This happened to
me, so let me like outperform, outshine, like do everything perfect so that people don't see me as this damaged, like good. And I think a lot of times people see, and people have said this to me before, you don't look like a sexual assault survivor. And I'm always like, well, what am I supposed to look like? Like, what do you think of? And they think of someone who, has engaged in sex work or, is someone who has low confidence. And it's like, is not one way to be a survivor. And we have to stop putting the stigma on people to say, if you are a survivor, you have to look a certain way. You can't be empowered. And for me, it's about intentionally being empowered, intentionally doing work in my community around an issue that I am intimately familiar with. And even as a prosecutor, in my cases, I would never tell my victims that I was a survivor. But I remember this one particular young woman, and she was just like, this is an adult. She had to be in her 20s. She was like, Miss Jones, you are just like, you're knowing all the questions to ask. You are just so thoughtful in how you're talking to me. You have to have been through sexual assault before. And I was like, well, actually I have. Normally I don't talk about it in my cases. And she was like, I knew it because of the way, the way you are talking to me and the way you see me. I would have never thought I could get this from the criminal justice system.
Let me ask you a question. We talked about the sister you said that was at the church and her abuser was at the church. As somebody who's worked in reentry, a lot of people that I have had to help in my career have been sex offenders, right? And it's almost as if that seemed as the there's no redemption.
I was
for
no atonement,
right? No atonement, no restoration for that population. What are your thoughts on that? The people that held to account in terms of being convicted, served time, went through therapy, went through the sex offender therapy and all that kind of stuff. And they want to have somewhat of a normal life. They want to have a job, they want to be able to exist, Do you see a road to that? And in terms of your work, is that part of it?
That's a great question. I'm a true believer in there is grace for those who seek it. And a part of being someone who is a harm doer is, acknowledging your space in the world. If you are a sexual offender, it's going to the leadership in that church or the pastor and saying, hey, FYI, because it's going to get you way farther to be upfront about it than for somebody to Google you and then it's a whole big thing. And there should be things put into place for churches. Like, we shouldn't have sex offenders working in children's ministry, full stop. But we do, because we don't do background checks. We don't do that due diligence. And that's one of the things I talk about, how to talk to churches about setting policies around if there is a sex offender in the church, how do you treat that person with dignity while also like respecting the fact that, you also have vulnerable people around, because, there is high recidivism rates with sexual offenders. So how do you put in place protections for the people while also giving grace to the person who wants it? Now, I have seen cases. I had I was in a conversation not that long ago where it was a leader in the church, and she disclosed that she was sexually abused by someone in the church when she was younger. And that person went on to become a minister and a pastor. And she saw them when she was an adult, and they were like, they came up to her and was like, you still mad at me? Why didn't you forgive me? Are you supposed to forgive me? That is somebody
that ain't seeking grace.
Who is not seeking grace.
Yeah, that ain't seeking grace.
And she was like, how was I supposed to as an adult, that's the type of energy you come at me with, is like, you're a Christian, you're supposed to forgive. Are you still mad at me? Yes, I'm still mad at you. So it's about, being cognizant of, what happened. I wouldn't recommend you going to the same church where the person you sexually abused are there. For me, my abuser was a trustee in the church. So it's like, how do you, as a child, reconcile, having these church leaders be in the church and being able to just get away with all this abuse, and there's no adult holding them accountable or checking them, or having these moments where adults are just talking to each other to not to say, I need to root out sexual abuse in my church to see who's sexually abusing people, but just having those conversations, listening to those red flags. Because oftentimes when you have conversations with people, there'll be little subtle things that people may say that you may be like, wait a minute, this is a little strange. Let's talk more about it. Like, why are you so, I don't want to say even obsessed, but why are you so fixated on this one young person? Why are you bringing this young person gifts? Why are you giving them, it may start off with candy, and then it moves to Barbies, and then it moves to money. Grooming is real. So having those conversations, asking those questions, being that active bystander to make sure that this isn't going on. One of the things that I tell churches, in children's ministry, when you have your volunteer orientations and your volunteer meetings, you as a volunteer cannot show any type of favoritism to any child. If it's your own child, that's different. But do not bring gifts to a child, because again, you do not want to be seen as somebody who is grooming. You don't. And doing that favoritism, that also makes the other kids feel bad when you're bringing this one kid donuts, but not the rest of them. But for me, as a former prosecutor and somebody who works in this area, it's like, no, that's a sign of grooming.
Yeah. I remember somebody gave my daughter $1. It was like a weekend, Friday. Monday, man, walked there, thought I walked, hey, you can't give her nothing, bro.
Mm-hmm. It was a grown-up?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You can't give her nothing, man.
No.
Yeah, I had to be very, very clear about that. Don't give her anything, bro.
Yep.
And I was kind of I had to catch myself from saying it to her, like she's a kid. Or a kid's gonna take her, they want, any kid. Oh, sure, but nah, don't. Okay. We ain't doing that.
If you give it to the whole class, that's one thing. Yeah, sure, right. But if you give it to one person,
why her? That was my question. Did he give everybody $1?
Yep.
What did he give you $1 for?
Yeah.
No, we ain't doing that. Yeah.
It's so amazing to sit here and listen, and I think about this often. How we are really just coming out of the dark ages when it comes to sexual abuse, sexual assault, sexual misconduct as a whole. I remember having a conversation with some people, and I was like, I think like any woman over like 70 probably been sexually abused, just because how crazy it was back then, right? And then when I had to step back and be like, well, if you think that about then, you might could say any woman over 30.
Yeah.
Right.
Because how things were when we were young.
Sure. What the norms were.
Right.
These norms are like really just starting to be broken.
Yeah.
That's the part that's so crazy.
Taught, bro. Like that, it was all right. Like this is how it goes.
Right.
Like the people introduce you to what you should be doing as a man. You know what I'm saying? Like they're telling you this is what you do. Or just you be aggressive, or things we talked about before.
Right.
And like for some people who had, you think about it too in the context of like, I'm thinking about it in the context of the time I grew up in, the community I grew up in, the culture I grew up in, where it was the crack epidemic, and we didn't have a lot of adult supervision, and you hearing this really the guys that I'm talking about, like if we're 10 and 11, they 16. I say like they 30, they're 16 or 17, and the real big boys 21.
Right.
You know what I mean? But you getting this messaging. But for the guys, I had something in the house that helped, equal, give me some balance.
North Star.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I was loved, and I was taught to be kind and to be sensitive to women, those things. But for a lot of my peers, they missed that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They missed it. So they getting this like this what you're supposed to do.
Right.
So with
that's scary.
With that statement he just made, right? And this is on my mind because we've seen this past weekend the large conference calls in support of Kamala Harris, right? And there was a lot of attention put on the men's call, right? And the men who attended that call stood up online. I was on the call. I'm responding. And this conversation around sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, I think you mentioned it earlier, it's often segregated. The women are having it, the men are having it. What do you think the men can do, like realistically, to begin to shift things in a better direction to be able to help out with this?
I do not think sexual assault is a women's issue. I think it's a society, cultural issue. And I think in talking about it like that, like it's just not, like we said earlier, men are sexually abused as well. Same-sex couples are abused as well. So not even thinking about it as in like, this is a heterosexual male on female thing. No, this is the spectrum of people. This is a people issue. I think by men talking about it and being open like you all are right now with your experiences and how you were raised and how culture talked to you all in a certain way, but then talk to me as a woman in a different way. Having those conversations are important, not just for us in the room, but also for our kids. And being open and honest with them about, these are the messages that I used to get, and you may get these messages too, but this is why it's wrong. This is how we're going to shift the conversation. This is what we're going to tell people now. This is what we're going to talk about now as father, daughter, mother, son, father, son, etc. Because I think it's just so important to shift the language and the conversations around it. Talking about, I've been talking all day long, y'all. Talking about how as a Black community, how this is so ingrained in us. I think when I talk about the statistics around enslaved Black women and how this has been in our DNA, people are like, whoa, because we don't think about it like that. But like if something is ingrained in you, and it's even if something that happened to your ancestors, that DNA, that history is ingrained in you. But having the conversations about what you talked about earlier about the breeding houses and the breeding plantations, having those conversations about our history is so important to help start to shift the conversation. I guarantee they were not having those conversations 20 years ago.
Yeah, we know that.
So are we actually talking to our young people? Are we talking to each other? Are we having those honest, real conversations where we're telling people, okay, this is the best way to avoid having there be any ambiguity in whether somebody consents?
Yeah, for sure.
Two things. One, how can institutions, religious institutions, reach out to you about having you come in? And then secondly, I heard you talk a bit about the policies with churches. Like, is there something that you're working on to be documented that can be left with them?
Yeah, so churches can reach out to me by going through Christina at commandjoyco.com. I started a company called Command Joy last year, and we started doing work with churches around how do churches keep kids safe. So the environment, like how are there spaces where kids are, where a kid can be pulled aside in the dark? Or are you putting in practice, like when you're having a one-on-one conversation with a kid, being able to see them but not hear them? So I can see you talking to that kid, but I can't hear your conversation, because we know that some conversations should be confidential. Knowing that you have a background system check in place. Like, most churches don't have any kind of background checks. And are you going beyond the background check by talking to that person's former church? Hey, were there any issues? Because they're not going to put that on their background check.
Yeah.
And like I said before, if for every one rape of a black woman, 15 go unreported. So there are so many people who jump from church to church because they sexually abuse people from church to church. But churches aren't being smart enough and calling that church before to ask those questions. And no, that's not an HR violation to ask a question about, has this person had any issues with sexual assault in the past? So what we're doing is coming out with a report that's going to come out at the end of this year, beginning of next year, where it's going to talk about the process for the conversations, what we've learned, and what are some best practices for churches based on, my training and experience and what we've heard from congregations, like what people have put in the chats for our virtual conversations, what people have said out loud in our in-person conversations, and how churches can just be that true safe space for healing for people who have been sexually assaulted.
Yeah. Now, we appreciate you coming on. This was really like a level set conversation to remind me of, like, just to be vigilant, right? To be aware, to try to make sure that we're having the right conversations, setting the right examples.
Yep.
That's right.
All of that, right? It's just a very sobering, level-setting conversation, but necessary.
Yeah.
So we appreciate you for coming on.
Thank you. And, sex is fun. I mean, I'll be the first one to say that. But it's how we talk about it. Like, sex is not this scary thing that I think we start off with by telling our kids, oh my God, if you have sex, you're going to get pregnant, or you're going to get a disease, or you're going to be unworthy or impure. It's having a serious conversation about what sex is and what sex isn't. Yeah. And if we start from there, then a lot of the stigma and a lot of the shame that so many people feel when they're sexually abused can hopefully not be there.
Yeah. Sure. Well, now, we thank the viewers for watching this very important discussion. And again, thank you, Christina, for being with us and the work that you've been doing and channeling your experiences in a way that can not only be helpful to you, but people beyond this region, across the world, right?
No question about it.
And any way that we can continue to support that, we will. So, again, thank you.
Thank you both for having me on. I appreciate it. And just, thank you for your bravery in amplifying this conversation.
Oh, yeah. One love to all the viewers. We'll see you next time. Heart of the City.
Heart of the City.